Here we go. And here we go. Welcome back, everybody. Parsha themes. Parsha review. You may not have known this, but I had 3 French roommates when I was in yeshiva. I would terrorize them with my minimal French. I didn't know what they were talking about, and I was like, "Oui, pourquoi?" Right? And they would just like go like they thought that I knew what they were talking about, and just like it was a lot of fun. So either way, this week's parsha is Mitzorah. It is the 5th portion in the book of Leviticus, the 28th portion from the beginning of the Torah, and there are 90 verses. It's a little bit long, a little bit larger than last week's Torah portion in verses. There are 1,274 words and 4,697 letters in this week's parsha. Every letter means something. There are 11 performative commandments in this week's Torah portion. And the theme of this week and last week's Torah portion, if you remember, is the holiness of the body. Holiness of the body. That's the bottom line. So remember, we mentioned last week of the Mitzorah, someone who had leprosy. What did they get leprosy for? Not for doing mitzvahs. Like I was talking to someone today, and we got into a conversation about someone I know who recently sat in prison. So he said, "Oh, what did he do?" I'm like, "He didn't do mitzvahs, right?" That I can guarantee you, right? But
I've seen the word lashon spelled L-A and L-O.
lashon, lashon is the tongue. It's
L-A?
evil. It's L-A. Lashon. Well, you can pronounce it with an O, but it's better. It's more proper in English for it to be L-A-S-H-O-N. Okay, so there are 3 stages in the Mitzorah's purification. Now, we remember there are also 3 parts of the contamination that the Mitzorah would undergo, which is the body, the clothes, and then the house. In the purification, there's also 3 parts, and that is, he would bring 2 birds. He has an earthenware bowl filled with fresh spring water. He also asks for 2 birds of the same species. He slaughters one of the birds over the spring water and squeezes the blood into the bowl. The slaughtered bird is then buried. Next, the Kohen ties together a stick of cedar wood and a branch of an azov, a hyssop tree, with a red wool string.
Is that in here?
No, you don't have it there. Okay. Then he takes the tied set of sticks and the live bird, right? Because he brought 2. We have 2 birds, right? And dips then into the bloody water. He sprinkles some of the water on the Mitzorah's hand 7 times, and then sends the bird away. If the bird comes back, he sends it away again until the bird is gone. The Kohen then shaves off all of the Mitzorah's hair. Then the Mitzorah goes into the mikvah to purify himself and his clothes.
Does he shave the head and the eyes, or the whole body?
Every single hair on his body is removed. Everything. It's a little bit embarrassing. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. To purify himself and his clothes. Then the Mitzorah counts 7 days. On the 7th day, the Mitzorah shaves off all their hair again. And the Mitzorah and his clothes then take another dip in the mikvah.
And this is only for men or for anybody?
Probably for anyone.
You never read that they shaved a woman from one end.
Right, correct. Most likely it's probably the men who deserve it more.
Yes,
right?
Probably.
Okay, so that is the process of the Mitzorah's purification. Now, the Torah describes the procedure of the Mitzorah, a person afflicted with tzarat, right, with this leprosy, upon the conclusion of his isolation period. The process we mentioned extends for a week and involves offerings and immersions in the mikvah. Then a Kohen must pronounce the Mitzorah pure. He must announce that now you are pure. Okay, it's an important thing. You have to have an actual declaration, which, by the way, when a woman goes into the mikvah for her own purification process, the mikvah lady has to declare tahor, she's pure. If she doesn't make that declaration, she just says, good. That's not good enough, right? You have to say tahor, she's pure. Okay, that's part of the. Okay, now, a very important thing. What happened? Why does? Think to yourself for a second. Why does a person get such a punishment for speaking negatively about someone else? They spoke negatively about someone else, and this is what happens to them, right? They get the leprosy, which is embarrassing, very severe.
So you don't do it again.
Just tell us, why did someone have the chutzpah to talk like that about someone else? He was arrogant. It's time to a little humility is in order. This whole process is a process of humbling the person, bringing them to a point where they realize, I stepped out of bounds here. This is not the way I should be conducting myself. I stepped out of bounds, and therefore this affliction comes onto a person. So it's a process of arrogance to humility, shaving off every hair from the body. Who wants to walk out like that? Who wants to be seen? You go to a coffee shop without any eyebrows, without any, right? Like everything is got a little bit embarrassing, right? A person will think twice before they talk again negatively about other people. It's only because someone feels like they're, you know who I am. I could talk about somebody else. No.
Don't forget, the entire population knows when they see them out here.
Exactly. They know exactly what happened here.
It's not like just one person.
Don't forget that this happened to someone in the Torah, in front of everyone. But Miriam, Moshe's oldest sister, right? She went through this process.
I heard she had leprosy. I never read that they shaved.
Right. So that I don't think she was obligated to have that, and it wasn't as long a process. She only waited 7 days. She was isolated for 7 days from the camp, and they waited. They waited for her because she was a righteous woman. She talked about Moses' wife.
And there was no water without her.
That's correct. Okay, so now, what happens? What happens if someone's poor and they don't have money to bring 2 birds? So there's an offering for a poor Mitzorah. A Mitzorah of limited financial means may substitute lesser offerings for the more expensive animals or whatever else was needed. They were able to bring something less. Now, it's a very interesting and a beautiful, beautiful character trait that you'll find in the Torah. The Torah is always concerned for the lesser person, for the lesser able, for the handicapped. We see this as a constant in the Torah, where the Torah is concerned what will be if the person can't afford it. It's an interesting thing when they brought the gifts to Jerusalem, they brought the gift baskets. So if you're a wealthy guy, bring the gold baskets. Right? Everyone had a minimum. It was a minimum that everyone had to bring, which was something very, very small. Oh, you want to do it? You want to do it in a more lavish way because you can afford it? Great, you can do that. But everyone has to do that minimum, and the minimum was an amount that someone who was poor wouldn't feel ashamed. I'll tell you something. I'll tell you to what this compares to. There's a problem in the religious community probably for the past 50 years. It's called the wedding problem. What's the wedding problem? The wedding problem was there were people who would make these lavish weddings that, with gold dripping, and it's like, they go overboard, and it's like a $500,000 wedding. What happens to the person who can only afford a $10,000 wedding, or even that he can't afford? What's going to be with his daughter when he has to marry her off? She's going to be like, all my friends have this fancy schmancy wedding. What are they going to do? And it's a big problem, because especially in the religious community where it's very tight-knit, meaning everybody sees everybody's business a little bit, sometimes even a little bit too much. Okay? But we're all in the same neighborhood. What do you expect, right? Like, it's a beautiful thing, but it has some setbacks. So the rabbis addressed this issue in the following way. They came out with big announcements, and the announcements were: there's something called a wedding, a standardized wedding. Standard wedding. And the standard wedding is when you have a limited orchestra, and you have limited flowers, and limited expenditures for photography and whatever else that's required for a wedding. And that's the standard for all weddings. Now, why did they do it? They know there's going to be that rich boy who's going to make that $500,000 wedding anyway. Right. But at least he's breaking away from the practice. So the people who only keep the wedding of the standard, they don't feel ashamed, because I'm following what the rabbis declared. He doesn't feel ashamed. This is what the rabbi said. Right? And those weddings, by the way, it's like a package wedding. You pay the hall. It comes with the photography, with the music, with the everything, and it's gorgeous places. It's gorgeous. And every hall has to have, I believe, 1 or 2 days a week that have those weddings. That they're not subsidized, but they are protocol weddings. And it's like, I think it's like $12,000 or $13,000, maybe $15,000 for the whole wedding. Imagine.
What happens if people can't afford that?
I know, but that's nothing compared to, someone told me recently that they're engaged, right? The flowers for the wedding was going to cost $9,000. Flowers for the wedding. You know what orchestras cost?
50.
No, if you have a big one, right? But it can cost thousands and thousands of dollars. Here's the whole package is $15,000 at most. The whole package, everything.
A lot of people can't afford that also.
Right. And you know what? There are funds to help with that as well. But the idea is that someone's now not embarrassed to have let's call it a protocol wedding. Because this is what the rabbi said you should have. Why are you making such a simple one? It's not as what? This is what the rabbi said. And they made a big fuss about it. It was in all papers. The idea is, in all the Jewish newspapers, they had the protocols of the wedding, so that people aren't embarrassed to have the simple wedding if that's what they can afford.
We used to have simple bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs in Houston prior to the influx of out-of-towners.
And guess what? Today, people are spending. I asked our dear participant who used to do party planning for bar and bat mitzvah. I think she may still be doing it. She said that people are spending over $250,000 on a bar and bat mitzvah.
Oh my God! Yeah, a friend of mine spent $200,000 on a bar mitzvah.
You'll have to put me away. I would never.
Well, I'm glad my bar mitzvah partner and I agreed to keep it reasonable, and
Right.
we did.
But it becomes crazy. It becomes crazy.
When we made our bar mitzvah, we got a pizza and a phonograph.
There you go. There you go.
You know what else is the tombstones
Mhm.
have been done away with, the baby shirt.
All together? Only had.
The old side still has tall monuments, but the new side, it's just a plaque in the ground.
That's also a good thing. It's a good thing.
I know they got that at Emmanuel Cemetery too, because there's one on my mom and one on my stepdad. It's just flat in the ground.
Yeah, they can.
Well, I mean, it's an engraved stone.
Yeah, it's a
But
good stone, but
there's
it's
no
not like
more
those things with
monuments.
Right. Right.
little flower things on each end to put flowers in.
Right. It's the responsibility. I'll tell you the story again. I'm sure you've heard the story from me in the past. Before my oldest brother's bar mitzvah, my father and my brother went to one of my relatives' bar mitzvah. Right, he was at the bar mitzvah age, so he went. He was invited to go there. I don't know all the kids. You're not going to invite all the kids. It's like
50 kids.
There's a lot more. From my mother's side, there are about, I think, 80 or 90 first cousins. On my mother's side, and all of those have probably between average size families between 5 and 10 or maybe 13 children. So you're talking about my grandmother, before she passed away, had close to 300 grandchildren.
Oh, right.
right?
Baruch Hashem.
Great grandchildren. Sorry, great grandchildren. All right, so it's like you're talking about. All right, so you can't invite everybody and all of their kids, and if you do it today, it's like So my brother went to the bar mitzvah with my father, and after the bar mitzvah, my brother sort of like said to my father, my bar mitzvah is going to be nicer than that bar mitzvah, right? Right? It was a very simple. My father said to him, "No, your bar mitzvah is going to be exactly the same." So what do you mean? You can afford a nicer bar mitzvah than that? He said, "It's true that I can, but can every kid in your class's father afford it?" He says, "I'm going to make a nice bar mitzvah for you. Every kid's going to go home and say, I want a bar mitzvah like Wolbe had. And then the fathers are going to say, oh, my kid's going to be bar mitzvah only once in a lifetime. I can't let him down. Bar mitzvah is really important for him, right? So what's the father going to do? He's going to have to cheat and steal or borrow money that he can't pay back so that he can have a bar mitzvah at the standard that I make it?" Says, we're going to make a bar mitzvah that's not going to be overwhelming, and it's not going to be, wow, what a bar mitzvah, the most amazing bar mitzvah. I want my son's bar mitzvah to be the same. I'm going to have a bar mitzvah that's going to be a nice bar mitzvah, but nothing that everyone's going to be like, whoa, what an amazing, right? You have these bar mitzvahs where they give out and everyone gets their own Bordeaux, a French Bordeaux, and they have the over the top, and everyone. Yeah, and they're going to give every guest, instead of giving you a little bencher, they're going to give you an entire Talmud, right? They go home, you need a truck to take home it's crazy, right? Something which is and that's the way my father raised us. He raised us with a very unassuming lifestyle where nobody will ever come and say, I'm jealous of your possessions, of your house, of your car, or of your, right? I think it's a very important standard, and we see that in the Torah. There's always that minimum standard that everyone is obligated to. You want to add to it? You can add to it. But at least there's a standard that no one's going to be embarrassed that they're at that basic level. Right? In a way, they can do that also in the memberships of the synagogue. Now, again, it's something that I don't think it's discussed. Perhaps it's not discussed, but you have these what do you call them? These gyms that people have, the memberships that people have. People are paying thousands and thousands of dollars to be part of a society, to be part of to live up to a certain standard. It's dangerous. It's dangerous. It really is dangerous. So, and it's a real problem, just so that you know, it's not just a hypothetical problem. It's a real problem. What? Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, so impurity and purification of a house. Before a Kohen diagnoses that a house has tzarat, that it has leprosy, household possessions are removed to prevent them from also being declared ritually impure. The tzarat is removed by smashing and rebuilding that section of the house. So if there's a specific wall, they'd knock down that wall. But what's if the tzarat, the leprosy signs reappear? Then the entire building must be raised and knock it to the ground, and you got to start all over again. That's not pleasant, right? And
this is only in Israel. It doesn't occur outside of Israel, right? I
believe so. Yeah. Now, bodily impurities. This is general. This is the top. The topic now moves on from leprosy, which is a spiritual impurity that reflects in a body. A body itself can have its own impurities, right? Male, female can have different types of bodily impurities. The Torah details which bodily secretion render a person spiritually impure and thereby prevent his contact with holy items. So, for example, if a person was ritually impure, if a male or a female were ritually impure, they wouldn't be able to go into the temple and bring an offering. I want to tell you an amazing story.
Sure.
An amazing story. I heard the story from the source. Okay, I heard it from a rabbi, a prominent rabbi in New York. I heard the recording of him talking about this story. There was a and this is for mature audience only. Okay, so this rabbi went on a trip with one of his members of his congregation, a wealthy man, and they went on a trip to Israel. And they went to many places, many holy sites, and they went to Meron and to Tzfat, and they went to pray by many of the graves of the great Torah masters. And part of their trip, they went to a Kabbalist. Kabbalists are people who are holy. In fact, there was a Kabbalist that's called, they call him the Rentgen. Anybody know what a Rentgen is? Okay, I'm getting confused now with the Hebrew. That's what they call it in Hebrew. In English, it's the how do you call it? That you can see through someone. You see the
Transparent?
no, you can see.
Through them?
Yeah, not through them, but you can see. How do you call it?
Like
The X-ray vision, right? So this guy can see you like an X-ray. Right? He doesn't see it. Like, it's frightening. Okay. Really frightening. People come to, and he can see like right through piercing vision.
Your body or your brain or what?
Your soul. He can
Your
see like the
soul.
whole. Right. Okay. So they go into this Kabbalistic rabbi, and they say to this wealthy businessman says to the rabbi, "I have a big problem." Says, recently my business, I come to the table to close on a deal, to buy a property, to buy this a building. He says, at the closing table, it falls apart every single time. Everything is in order. He said, I had a deal in Florida. I was going to purchase a piece of property. And as I get to the closing, they call me and say, it's canceled. What do you mean it's canceled? Someone else bought it yesterday for cash. And he says these deals every single day are like, he says, what's going on? He says, I haven't closed the deal in 6 months. It's like, I'm really concerned. What's going on? Kabbalist looks at him. And the Kabbalist says to him, do you want the rabbi to stay here or not? He says, he's about to reveal something. The Kabbalist, right? So he says, no, the rabbi can stay. See, he says, you're doing something with your body that you shouldn't be doing. Right? And he says that every time you do that with your body, he was masturbating, right? Every time you do that with your body, the semen is neshamas, weight that you're wasting, are standing at the gates of parnasa, of livelihood. And they're saying, don't give him a livelihood. He brought us into this world and doesn't give us sustenance. You have to feed us before you feed him. Pretty heavy. Oops is right. That's what the Kabbalist tells him. He says the Kabbalist said you have to stop that behavior because that behavior is taking away from your livelihood. I can bet he never did it again. But that's if you want to know that there are spiritual impurities that a person can bring onto himself.
Yeah.
And it's not something to be taken lightly in the world we're living in today, and people justify these things. By the way, that's a biblical prohibition. It's a biblical prohibition for someone to waste their seed.
Yeah.
And there's an obligation to rectify that. There's an obligation to rectify that. So,
This again is only for the male.
right, but there are women impurities as well that are obvious ones, right? A woman menstruates, that's a different type of impurity, right? But that's
That's natural.
that is natural. That's true, but it's still an impurity. It's a spiritual impurity. It's not okay. Not well. It's the idea is that there's a process to getting a person back into the state. Now, there are some people who say that a woman who's during that period of time shouldn't kiss a Torah scroll. I'm unaware of such halacha. I've never heard of such a thing. I've been asked that multiple times. I still have not seen a source for it. So now, and the Torah defines how one regains a state of ritual purity back. There's never a situation, never, ever a case where a person can't return to a state of purity, right? There's never a state, because there's one foundation in the Torah, which is unshakable, and that is that anyone and everyone can come back to a state of holiness. There's no such thing as someone's like, oh, ritually impure, stay out. Not for you. No, there's no such thing. Everybody can always return back to a state of holiness and purity. So that concludes this week's Parsha. Next week already, we're going to see new topics in the Torah, talking about
Family purity next week?
we're going to talk about family purity. We're going to talk about forbidden relationships. Yeah, a lot of that. All right. So, my dear friends, have a terrific evening. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for watching.
Thanks, Rabbi Wolbe.
Any questions? Any questions?
I have a comment.
Yes, please.
So last week we were talking about Lashon Hara as well.
Yep.
And it was funny because Monday afternoon, a friend of mine, I allowed her to really agitate me. And my instinct was to call another friend and go blah, 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 blah. And I said, you know, I'm not going to do this. That's not fair to her. And I got home and I just called out to God and started telling God, blah, 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 blah. And then we come to class and then whammo, there it is in my face, you know? So I was like, oh my God, how amazing. Thank you for guiding my thoughts and my actions. And I was wondering, like, is that the best thing to do? Or is there something else when my head's cuckoo?
Well, definitely the best thing to do is to find a healthy way to express yourself that doesn't put another person down. And if it requires a person to just go out into the fields and yell, right, do that, right? It's something, actually, there is the Hasidic teachings teach of something which is called hitbodedut, which is to isolate yourself so that you can have time to reflect and to have time to let it all out. And there are people who would spend up to a not up to a minimum of an hour a day reflecting, and they'd go out into the fields. We actually once did it when Rabbi Lazer Brody was in town. He took us out. We went to a park, and he gave us a it's like you have a huddle before they play football. What's the next play? We did a huddle, and he gave us guidance as to what to do, and to just talk to God, have a conversation, and you're out in the open and just talk to Hashem. Right? It was a remarkable experience. It's also therapeutic, and it's a good practice to get into. But if you have something that bothers in such a way, it's healthy to find a good way to have a good outlet for it, not to put them down in front of other people. That's definitely an important thing. So you did the right thing there.
Thank you. You're having a huge impact on me by talking about adding value to one another instead of taking value away.
Correct.
So
excellent.
Thank you.
All right. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. It's great to see all y'all. There we go.
Good Shabbos.
Have a great Shabbos.
You too.
Just thinking, listening
Yeah.
to you, I realize Lashon Hara is like